This is the first video I've ever done where I look beautiful because I'm wearing some makeup. No, I had a big zit on my chin, and as I was talking, it was just like follow the bouncing ball, and so Caitlin was able to mix some stuff together and put on my face. Felt nice to be doted on. Okay, so volumetrics, atmosphere, all of that fun stuff. Things have changed since Cycles came out 10 years ago. They just released Cycles X, Cycles 10, which updates a lot of things to new modern, hardware, and so everything can render a lot faster now in Blender 3.0 upwards. GPUs much faster now. Denoising is better too, which means it used to be kind of insane to render with a big volumetric environment. The render times would take forever, but now it's actually not all that intense, and there's things you can do to make things render a little bit faster too. A lot of people have been asking me about how I'm doing this volumetric look in a lot of my recent shots here, and it's really basic. And so I thought let's go through that real quick, and then maybe we'll move on to actually kind of making an epic looking shot. Also, heads up, I've got a lot of GPU buzz when my GPU's thinking. It's making this kind of bop sound, and I thought I'd fix it, and I thought I had kind of cool ways to filter it out, but none of it really worked, and so I'm kind of trying to split the difference right now. Hopefully it is not too annoying. Hello, meet Mr. Monkey. He loves you. Mr. Monkey is floating on his gray plane in an infinite gray void, just how he likes it. Let's mess with his whole deal. So the look of haze is defined by the way it interacts with light, which I guess is what defines the look of everything. But let's start with lighting. So under the World tab here, I'm going to change RGB to Environment Texture, which is going to let me load in a texture for the environment. Open. I'm going to use an HDRI from hdrihaven.com, which is such a cool resource. Greg takes them, gives them away for free. If you can support him on Patreon, I think he deserves it. But look at this. It just loads in. It has the sunlight built in. I like this one because it has not only like nice directional sunlight, which helps kind of sculpt the look of the scene, but also a nice color temperature difference where the sunlight's warm and the rest of the sky is kind of just this soft baby blue, which just feels like an early morning dawn to me. Adding the volumetrics. If you've ever messed around with this before, you might have gone into the shader editor, into the world settings, and just tried to add a volume scatter and plug it right into the volume, and you go, oh no, everything's black now. Even if you turn the density way down, it's still black. Like, it's doing stuff. It's not actually black. You can see lights, but because the world is effectively infinite, no outside light, no matter how low the density, is going to be able to penetrate an infinite mist. And so I don't do that. I like keeping things kind of localized. So let's just create a little cube here, and I'm going to scale it up to about the size that I want it to be for the scene. I'm actually going to keep it kind of flat because I like the idea of a low-lying fog, as if it is kind of like just the Earth's moisture escaping out into the air. Go into object settings here, create a new material. By default, it has, this white principled BZDIV, but we're going to plug in our volume scatter here. And there we go. We got our volumetric haze. It's just very dense right now. You can see the sunlight barely penetrates into the edge at all, but we can set the density down, pretty far. Normally have mine at like 0.1 or 0.2, but for demonstration, we'll turn it up a little bit. And look at this. This is just already so pretty to me, and it renders so quickly. Like, obviously I'm running a 3090, those are very fast, but it's also only taking moments to resolve, and which means I think this could render on basically any machine. And there's multiple reasons for that. Yeah, again, faster GPUs and new updates to Cycles X, but also the way I'm going about it. So when I used to do my experiments with volumetrics, I would always do the fun stuff, like a flashlight beam, or car headlights, or all the film noir stuff, street lights, casting cones. It turns out that is the hardest stuff for a path tracer to deal with volumetrically. Because if you remember the video from last month where I was talking about basically the path tracer hits the object and it's looking for the light source. In this case, it's not just hitting the object, it's also can hit any point in the air, and those points can hit other points, and it's bonkers. And all they're trying to do is find a light source. In this case, the light source is the entire sky. So anywhere it goes, it's going to find, a fairly suitable neutral value here. And so, yeah, as long as you keep the light sources, like, big, it's a lot easier for volumetrics to handle it. Or actually, okay, so looking at this a little bit closer, like Blender volumetrics, you know, very definitely does not like rendering spotlights volumetrically, but the size, the radius of the light source doesn't seem to have as big of an effect as the number of total lights. Because what this means is each individual point of haze, it has to decide which light to bounce to, and so it just takes a lot longer to resolve than if you only have like a singular, large, fairly even light source over the top. So that's my biggest takeaway, is just having a lot of individual high contrast light sources is a good way to get a whole bunch of noise really quickly. And in the olden days, because of render times, I used to just plug an emission shader actually into the volume. And I've had some people like recommend and ask why I don't still do that, and it does render much faster. But also, like, this is what it looks like it is a haze, but it also is glowing and it's lighting up everything and it ignores all the actual lighting, and you kind of have to tint it by hand to match the color that you think it should be. And so just like this compared to this, if you can do proper volumetrics, they're great. Oh, and for those of you curious about Eevee, yes, Eevee is fine. It's much more difficult to get a good result. Like the first thing you'll notice with Eevee here, let me hide the haze, is that it lights with an HDRI by just like using the intensity of the HDRI on that face, no matter if it makes any sense. Like here, if we put the monkey in a cube, like the sunlight isn't going to be casting any shadows. It's always just going to be there. And so if you want it to be doing shining into the haze, we have to actually add our own sunlight into here, which is fine. Let's try doing something like that and warming it up a little bit to match the real sun. And we'll bring the haze back in here, and just, yeah, right now it's maybe too intense. We'll turn it down, and that's looking kind of nice. Under the render properties here, changing the tile size, smaller is actually better. That's how granular it is, and so I have it as small as you can get right now. Sometimes you have to tweak, you know, the range of the haze. But yeah, a lot of times it gets this kind of muddy look, and maybe there's a way around that. I don't know exactly what it is, but yeah. One thing I like is anisotropy. I'm gonna say anisotropy, but I think that's wrong.
Anisotropy.
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 Material anisotropy.
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 Oh, well, I never was there ever. A cat so clever as
NASA's Wilkinson Microwave Anisotropy Probe.
If we turn that up, you'll notice the area around the sun starts to kind of get a little bit brighter, and that's just saying it's the light path's inclination to hit some point in the mist and keep going in that same general direction instead of like bouncing off in a random direction. I love this because it kind of looks like the sun is flaring in from the side. I used to cheat this all the time in the composite. Like in After Effects, I'd create a solid color, I'd give it a feathered mask and use a blend mode to kind of like make it look like the sun was bleeding in. But here it's actually mathematically all there, and I like it. I like it a lot. Sometimes with denoising and stuff, this is the area where it can like get a little bit tricky. Like you can see right here, right around the sun, it's taking a little bit longer to resolve. Just a thing to keep in mind. Also, you can plug stuff into the density to make kind of a cool effect. Here, let's create a just noise, texture noise, plug the factor into the density, and right now that means it's most of the density is back up to around like 1, which means it's too dense. Also, you can see from the side it kind of looks like this is squished, and that's because it's using the dimensions of the cube that are now squished down. We can avoid that. Here I'm going to select this, and because I have Node Wrangler turned on, I can just hit Control-T, and it brings up these mapping nodes. I'm going to use the object mapping instead, which uses just, it scales it to the object's actual shape, but that does mean I have to hit Control-A and apply the scale. But now it's actually just going to be a uniform noise in all directions. Here I'm going to change the scale to like way down to like 0.1, but we still can't really see what's going on. So let's remap. Right now this noise is providing values from 0 to 1, which is way too much. So let's use a converter. Map range, you can see it's going from 0 to 1 to like -0.3 to 0.3, And now we've got this. Look at that. It looks like clouds, and this does take noticeably longer to render. However, I feel as if it doesn't take nearly as long as it did in 2.9. I feel like some of their optimizations may have been targeted at this type of volumetric rendering specifically. But also, okay, back to Eevee, because credit where it's due. Eevee is incredible at rendering, volumetrics with different textures and stuff. We'll play with the density here. Like, it renders so fast, you can play around with it. There's ways to this is not doing it justice. This is just literally noise into a volume thing. I'd love to dive deeper into clouds and just play with those for a while. I've always been intimidated, but just seeing how fun it is in Eevee, I'm like, man, this is this looks really good. So let's try doing some stuff to this picture right here. I'm gonna delete the existing lighting. Now we're in the pink place. We'll make it RGB. Ooh, I like it just flat and overcast like that. Yeah, let's make it very dark. And let's create a big bright sunlight here. Just coming straight down. And here, let's maybe make it like brightness of 6. Make sure the angle is 0.5. That's about how big the sun is actually in the sky. If you create like a point light and turn it into a sunlight, for whatever reason, it'll be like 11 degrees, which means it's a very, very soft light. But yeah, this is looking okay. Here, let's make it maybe coming in from the back a little bit, and let's create our volume space. Here's a cube. Let's make it nice and big. Maybe make it kind of flat. This part is kind of, you just have to, I don't know, I guess wireframe mode would help. New material in the shader editor. I'm going to do that thing that we do where we delete this and then we create our volume scatter, plug that straight into the volume, and it'll be very dense right now. But if we turn the density down to like 0.02, what's it looking like? Ooh, that's kind of an interesting mist there. All right, so let's make it a little more interesting. So up above here, we could create like a cube and bevel it and actually try to like kind of hand model some cloud objects just for casting shadows. I mean, we could make them volumetric, but let's create a plane here and just kind of create a cloud shadow pattern instead. This will be up here. Create a new material. We'll call it clouds. And I think we just kind of leave everything like this. I'm going to hit Shift A, texture, noise texture, just straight there into the alpha. And what's that looking like? That's kind of nice. Here we'll put in a color ramp node here just to kind of crunch it a little bit. The black areas will be where there's no clouds, and we'll make the clouds themselves a little more dense. And ideally, when we get below, we'll actually start to see some of these beams coming through, especially if we turn up the scale so the texture's more dense. Ooh, that's interesting. Right now it kind of feels a little bit like it's underwater maybe, but we'll add some clouds in the background and it won't. I think the fact that it's just a void in the background is doing a lot of that. I want to, right now the lights all the rays are kind of like parallel, but if we point it towards the camera, because they're all kind of, they are still parallel, but they're coming towards us, and so it looks as if they're radiating outwards. That always used to confuse me as a kid. I'm like, I know the sunbeams are parallel, but why are they, diverging? It's because it's like train tracks. You're looking down the train tracks, and it looks like they meet. You guys probably already all knew that. Cool. Okay. And here, let's make it the tiniest little bit like greenish yellow for some reason. I don't know. I just kind of think that's cool. We'll probably be playing with these values a little bit too. So okay, I've been looking at some paintings by Albert Bierstadt, and I just think they're interesting because they're like 50% realism, 50% kind of like this wacky grandiosity. And I finally looked it up. Yeah, it turns out this painting is not designed to be seen on a monitor like this. It's actually 12 feet wide, which makes a lot of sense because it's full of all these little kind of sub-compositions. And like right here, there's this, and then there's kind of like this glen, and you can... It doesn't work as well like in its entirety as it does if you're just kind of like exploring it with your eyes, which I think is interesting. And one thing that he does over and over is he divides everything through the use of like this dappled sunlight. Like you'll get this bit here and then this like dark shadow band, against like the next bright layer behind it, and then there's the dark layer, and it draws your eyes in, but it also really helps divide the landscape into all of these cross sections that make it really easy to build, a composition into each layer. Like we have the path, we have the trees, we have the village, bunch. We have this dark hill, we have the mountains, you know, the foothills, then we have the big mountains. And actually, looking at a lot of paintings, I think it's interesting how often they just let the shadow areas be totally black. Like, I would think this was so weird, but like it makes the whole thing feel rich, which is why I haven't added any ambient light to the other shot. I'm kind of trying to channel this a little bit because the idea is that all of these kids are kind of exploring their little world, and I want it to feel kind of like, from their perspective, like larger than life and like a little bit surreal maybe. Because like, alright, so from the top maybe the clouds are casting a pattern like this, but once you get down low, the foreshortening kind of makes it so it feels as if, you know, everything is these horizontal bands. And that's the thing that, you know, you see when you look at a landscape. A lot of times things are broken up into these, like, you get the band of the ocean, and then the shore, and then the grass, and the road. And if you use that to kind of break up your landscape, it can be a nice way of showing both distance and organizing the scene. Well, that's nifty. Here, let's throw a images as planes here into the background. And look at this. I've got so many clouds. I've got too many clouds, because you put a picture of clouds in the background, it can completely sculpt the feeling of the shot. But then you put a different picture of clouds in, and it's still just as good, but it's just different. And then it's like, well, all of these are very different but good. I don't like having too many options. It stresses me out. But let's try something like this maybe. I'll change it to emit. And I'll stick it here in the background. Whoa, it's not even, we can't even see it all that well. Well, we'll deal with that. Although right now it's casting a shadow onto the scene here. We can turn that off here if we just go under object properties, visibility. We'll just turn off shadow, and now it is not visible to shadows, which is kind of cool. And let's see, I might even try to localize the haze just a little bit closer to the ground like this. How does that feel? Well, that's kind of interesting. And here I can shorten it up a little bit too. Just, I do want to see those clouds in the distance. And looking at the size of the clouds on the ground, you know, they are a little bit too dense maybe. Here we'll turn that down. I like watching it move like that. Here, let's animate it. I'm gonna go to frame 0 here. Just move this over, hit I, add a keyframe, and then maybe go to frame 100, slide it over just a little bit, hit I, add another keyframe, so now it animates, you know, between these two positions. If I keep those keyframes selected and hit Shift E, I can extrapolate them linearly, so the clouds will just keep moving forever. Something else we can do here. Let me hide the haze real quick. Select the cloud plane, tab into edit mode. I'm gonna grab these top two and hit Control H, which attaches them to an object, which is right now very small. But if we go into object mode and select it, you can see now we're just dragging around those top two vertices. So we can go like this, and it kind of looks as if the clouds are moving, which I think is really cool. So here we'll just go to frame 0, add a keyframe there, go to frame 100, and move them like that. And that, in conjunction with the haze, which again is so, maybe it's still a little bit too intense. Here, let's try 005, and yeah, that feels pretty good. And if we kind of scrub through, you can see now the clouds and the light rays all work in conjunction. I think that's fun. But yeah, now if we scrub through, you can see the clouds and the light rays and everything work together, and it just feels very, very dynamic. I might render out a quick preview of this. And all right, so it's clouds are moving way too fast. The light rays should probably go up a little bit further, and the whole thing might be a bit too high contrast. I maybe should have put in a little bit of fill light, but yeah, I am happy with this as like a concept, and I like the way that all the different areas of, like, you know, positive, negative space, like, do kind of work together in that kind of like tiny composition sense. I definitely want to play around with this look more in the future and see if we can kind of refine it a little bit. But let's move on. I haven't really messed with clouds like before, but that little glimpse of the Eevee stuff earlier has me all hot and bothered. So let's just play with that a bit more. Here, let's create a cube, scale it up to kind of cloud size. We'll have it kind of be again kind of the same shape as our haze. Create a new material, delete the default, and plug in our usual volume scatter here. I'm going to apply the scale of the object right now with Control A, so we can do texture stuff later and it won't all be super stretched. Create just a noise texture, plug it into the density, and you can see it's still stretched because we got to use the object's coordinates. So I'm going to hit Control T, plug the object in, and it should square it all up. Right now, it's creating the noise from 0 to 1, and we want it to be more like -1 to 1. Here, let's use a map range node. So there's some places that are like negative volumetrics. So we have not clouds. Let's see if this just does anything. Ooh, it kind of does. I think it's just so dense you can't really see anything. I'm gonna turn the scale way down to like 0.1 again. And yeah, there we go. That already feels so much like clouds. That's kind of ludicrous. Actually, here, let's turn it down even more. I'm gonna turn up the detail, which kind of just like nests the algorithm over, and it'll just keep kind of getting a little bit more fractal. Here, let's actually go quite a ways. And the roughness is another thing that really helps make things. Like, look at that, no roughness. And so you get to dial in exactly how you want it to look. Jeez Louise, that's absolutely nuts. And then we use a little bit of our
anisotropy,
and we get these highlights in the clouds that are pretty cool. And if we want, right now this is a maximum density of 1. We could make this like -5 and 5, and you suddenly get these, you know, very dark, intense clouds. If you don't want it to clip at the top and bottom, here, let's actually, right now the noise is creating the density, but we can combine that with other stuff. So I'm gonna make some room here. Let's just create a gradient texture. And if I Control-Shift click on this, we can see kind of a visualization. It plugs the viewer into the surface here because I got the node wrangler happening. Which means I can also hit Control-T to that lets me play around with the way this is mapped onto the object. I'm just going to rotate this 90 degrees to get it kind of going up-down here. And so now our gradient texture is just going, you know, up-down. I'm going to add a color ramp. Yes. Why did I say that as a question? And now as we do this, you can see it directly, you know, translates over onto the object. The black will be the areas where there are no clouds, and the white will be where there are clouds. So I'll just add black to the top and bottom here, and ideally we can just multiply that by this math, multiply, plug that into there, and okay, I think that's doing what we want. It's cut out a whole bunch of it. Let's see. What if we change it to something like ease? Okay, that's a little, yeah, that's kind of interesting. I like the idea of having the bottoms of the clouds be a little bit flat and the tops get puffy, just because like I feel like I've seen that in real life. Yeah, and I mean, you could do distortion, which is pretty nifty, although it doesn't particularly look like clouds. But you can also combine other things with these mapping nodes to move certain areas in certain ways, and it can get super nuts. But that would be a full-fledged node tutorial, which I am not quite up for in general or specifically right now. But yeah, clouds. I'm gonna play around with this more. This is pretty fun. Oh, and there's also, I should touch on this, there's also volume absorption, which you've probably wondered about, and it just, instead of scattering the light, it just makes the light disappear. And I like light, and so I don't use it very much, but if you combine these together and plug like the density into both of them, yeah, like I added one more. I increased the contrast of the density going into the absorption, so the inside of the clouds now are like really intense, which it's kind of an interesting effect. The one place that I've really found volume absorption adds a lot is rendering water. If you have it in a volume underneath the surface, it just absorbs all of the light that gets down too far, and that is very much like the real water. But yeah, I am obviously just very giddy about what we can render now. This seems like absolute magic. I'm very much hoping that this is actually because everything's faster, and it's not just because I'm using, you know, a really fast GPU, so that I'm like, hey, look at this, and people on laptops are like, yeah, that's got to be cool for you, dude. Just, you know, turn the samples down. But yeah, anyways, I will talk to you soon. I can't believe this turned into a cloud tutorial.